Okay, Jonathan.
Here.
Carla was not able to make it. Jimmy.
Present.
All right, thank you. All right, and I think also joining us today is Assemblymember LaFrance.
Hi, yes, I'm here. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks for joining us. Also joining us is Andy Ratliff from the school district. Andy?
Hi, thanks for allowing me to join you.
All right, I appreciate it. And I believe we also have Desiree. Desiree, are you with us?
I'm here just listening in. I started your recording just because I have the ability. If you need any background help on the meeting, just let me know.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. So the purpose of our time today is a work session to talk about the CARES Fund. I sent out an agenda and I'm going to see if I can pull that back up. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Nolan. So the purpose of the work session is at the request of the Budget Advisory Commission. I think the Assembly has also encouraged you guys to get together. We have a lot to cover in a relatively short amount of time, but at the end of this work session, our goal, I believe, is to have the Budget Advisory Commission offer some guidance, whether it's in a resolution or some form of communication to the Assembly and to the administration on your thoughts about the work that's been done to date and any suggestions that you might have moving forward. So that is kind of our goal. We have a list of things that we were going to talk about, and it has to do with, and I thought we would start from the beginning. I just recognize that the order of this agenda is a little bit different than the one I might have sent out. So what I would propose that we do is I'll talk a little bit about the structure of the payments for the Municipality of Anchorage. They're going to come in three pieces. Jason Bockenstead should be joining us here. He'll offer some updates on the use of the Treasury funds and any guidance. I did send out the 3 FAQs from the Treasury Department. Those are the latest ones that we have. I've sent them to you before. We're not going to run through each one of those. But following Jason, I will mention that the reporting on how we report for some of these grant requirements from the state and from the feds, I think offer a little bit more clarity, at least in my opinion, of what we can use those funds for. I'll talk about that. And then what I'd like to do is remind the group about the Assembly's framework that they put together for the allocation of funds. The administration was part of that discussion that took the Assembly many Assembly meetings. The current distributions of funds as they're currently allocated. Then I want to turn it over to Nolan to talk about the Economic Resiliency Task Force that the administration's put together. Nolan's a member of that. I sent out a link to that if you had a time to view. And then at the end, some considerations, and I think this is at least a couple Assembly members mentioned this at the Budget and Finance Committee, asking the Commission to consider, while we have 156 million, should we allocate 156 million, or should we put some aside for contingency and unknowns for what that might be? I think that is a key part of the discussion. And then some future considerations, not part of this work session, but just things coming up. September, we'll start talking about the alcohol tax. And then in October, we have a busy month ahead of us. And then next week, we have our September meeting. I'm working on the agenda. So does that sound okay with you, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, that sounds perfect and on point.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start with the first item here. The first item is 4A1, which is the structure of payments to the municipality for the dollars that we get. And as a reminder, what happens is the state is going to provide resources to the municipality, and the 156 million is actually going to come to us in 3 separate payments, and I'm going to call it sort of 3 tranches of payment. The first tranche of money that we got is about $116 million. And then they provide those dollars to us when we have, I think, 80% of it spent, or roughly 90 million. We get the reimbursement for those expenses. And that is primarily what a lot of the work that's been done or put out to the community, to businesses, and a variety of other support so far. There is another second tranche of money that will be coming to us probably later in October, and that is about $90 million. And then the third tranche is before the end of the year, which is another $90 million. And the current rules are you have to spend 80% of the first one in order to get reimbursed. So it's a pretty short window to spend a lot of money, and then you have to go through the end of the year. If Jason can add on some of the conversations that he's had with Treasury when he gets the chance to join us about the timing of what has to be done for when these dollars have to be spent. So I just wanted to let you know that we don't have $156 million in our bank account right now. The Assembly has given us authority to receive it all and to spend it all. And we're working with them when we have a plan. And we do have a plan on how the money is going to be spent. So that's how the structure of the funds are going to be coming to the municipality. Let me see. The next item is guidance from Treasury on the uses. Jason, did you get a chance to join us?
I don't see him on the call, Lance.
Oh, maybe *6. Let me make sure that he got, I know that he got invited. Well, maybe we'll come back to that. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm good with coming back to that part,
Okay.
Lance.
Okay. So the next piece I want to talk about is the framework. So as you recall, this is the framework that that was developed in concert. I think the Assembly put a lot of time to this together. I know you guys have seen this at least once. And just to kind of break it down, they basically had it in, if you want to, they had categories of priorities for economic, family support, housing, safety, community interest, direct municipal response, contingency fund, and then those were the priority areas. And then they had a timeline on short-term and long-term things, and then these guiding principles. I want to know if the BAC has had an opportunity to take a look at this, if you had any thoughts or comments. In my opinion, I think it's a pretty decent structure that allows a lot of latitude, and that was the formation of the allocation. But from a framework perspective, is there something missing from this framework? And members of the BAC, you may have been involved in some portions of this in other parts of your day-to-day lives. So I'll just turn it over to the BAC if you guys have any comments or suggestions or questions about this. Or Assemblymember LaFrance, if there's something you want to add to that I missed that might be of interest to the Assembly.
And I can start going, and maybe if Suzanne's able to weigh in. She and I actually just talked right before this meeting, and also when I presented last week for the Budget and Finance Committee, the Assembly members talked about some specific areas in the proposed breakdown where they could use some input, where especially from our group. One is that there's one was the overall distribution of where the funds are and in what buckets. Like the framework, is approved, but there is some latitude, in making adjustments to it, right? And there's so I think that whether the right amounts are in the right buckets, I think is one of the things that's up for discussion. Another thing is if you look in there, there's a in the that table that was distributed, which I think is pretty handy to have in front of you if you've got it for this conversation, is that there's a contingency that you see on the second page, and it's about $14.9 million, and that's kind of like that's sort of a placeholder for making budget adjustments later, and it's also available to allocate in other categories that might be useful. And so Suzanne was wondering if perhaps that money might go towards, if there's a business relief program that might make sense for that funding, or some other category, and so it'd probably be good to take a look at that. I think.
Hey, Nolan, before
Yes.
before you jump on, I didn't send the table of the allocations.
Oh.
I don't have it right away. Desiree, can you pull that up and maybe share your screen if you can get your hands on it, please?
Sure, let me find it.
Thank you.
And it's saved on the assembly page.
I will send the link. I'll put the link in the chat too. So. Yeah, it's pretty handy to have that in front of us.
Nolan, what was the amount that you were just talking about?
So it's called it's on the second page, and it's called Contingency Fund. About midway on the page, 14,900,366 and some change.
Got it. Thanks.
That one came up both Suzanne earlier today, and then also at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Austin mentioned, like, what else could we do with this, or what are some ideas with this, or there's essentially some unallocated money on the table. And if Suzanne, if you're able to speak, is there more that you wanted to add?
Thanks, Nolan. Well, the contingency fund definitely is for items that we may not think of, or if some of the areas on this list have a higher burn rate than expected. And this is something where Lance may want to weigh in, because my understanding is, depending on those burn rates and depending on community needs, we may be moving around funds, right? So that we're directing money where it needs to go. And then the other areas, because that third tranche on this list is just contingency and FEMA. And then the second tranche has a continuation of some programs, adds on FEMA, and a little bit of contingency fund, right? And there have been questions raised about the percent allocated for, or the amount allocated for that FEMA percentage. Is it adequate? So I know that's one area that may have some fluidity. And then also, let's see, I'm just trying to scroll up this to the first responder payroll. And okay, thanks. Okay, everybody see that line there at 21 million. And I don't know, Lance, if you want to speak to that piece. I know that there's a $16 million revenue deficit, primarily driven from the impact to the visitor and tourism industry that is in the background, but that given the Treasury's guidance, this is one way of providing some flexibility to local communities, for all these impacts because of COVID. But that's, my understanding is that 21 million is a minimum at this point. And I don't know if there's an anticipation it will go up. But otherwise, the only thing I would add is, what Nolan and I talked about, and I believe this may have been brought up either by Lance or Chris Schutte, the possibility of having even a loan program, low interest loan program, to some businesses. And, you know, based on this idea of, okay, first surviving and then adapting and then thriving. And those that have a plan for adapting or do, then maybe the loan is forgiven. But then Nolan had brought up the issue too of the difficulty of when you make funds, when there's too much complexity in getting the funds too, then that doesn't serve the purpose. So I'm interested in, you know, hearing about, are these the right amounts too for the business community or any of these other categories? So thank you for letting me weigh in.
Yes, thanks, Suzanne. So what input do we have from BAC? I know that there's a lot of information on the table now that takes a lot to digest, but if is there a starting point that you guys have for questions that you want to ask, or to get a little bit more of a grounding, or anything along those lines?
Nolan, this is Alyssa. I'm
Yeah.
interested in responding to Suzanne's last comment and yours about kind of the survive and thrive, and, you know, do you have a plan and those sorts of things. And in talking with, you know, state agencies and different ones like that, the suggestion has been made that I'm specifically talking about like training programs and programs that are there to help businesses get through this and survive, and hopefully, you know, either retain their business or, you know, make new and different connections to expand into different markets and capture different sources of revenue and things like that. The suggestions that have been put to me are, you know, oh, well, they should apply for these grants and then they should use those grants to pay for the funding, or, you know, to pay for training. And I think that if we put businesses in a place where they have really limited funding that's available specifically, you know, to pay their rent and to pay their employees, and now we're asking them to spend that on training to help them to, you know, connect to new markets or whatever it is that's going to help them just see to the other end of this crisis, I think we put them in a really difficult position of having to make those difficult trade-offs. And so I'm in favor of trying to figure out how can we fund some of these different programs that will help businesses to make it to survive just to the other end, and not having them have to take it out of, you know, the limited funds that they're already applying for and trying to fit it in as, you know, an acceptable activity to spend money on when they're trying to make a decision about how they're going to pay their rent. And so to have the muni be able to pay for some of those activities, I think is potentially valuable to businesses so that they can make the most of this downtime and again, and not have to, you know, take this really limited pot of funds that is there to, you know, pay rent and employees and whatnot, and make those difficult decisions about where they're going to spend it. So I'm kind of curious, and I'm looking through here to see, is there anything that the muni's already putting money towards that kind of fits that bill? That's really, you know, there's a lot of small business stabilization, but I'm not seeing at first glance, and my apologies for not having seen this table before, I'm not seeing that kind of training or those sorts of programs included in here. So just curious about that. Am I missing something? Or if Suzanne, if you can speak to that at all, if there are places in here where that kind of training or assistance, kind of a skills development sort of thing, or, you know, connecting to new markets, or those sorts, if it's in here.
Sure. Do you want to address that, Suzanne? And then it looks like after that we've got a question from Tasha.
Sure, thanks. And thank you, Alyssa, for bringing that up. That's a really great point. I don't know the answer to that as far as what the stabilization funds, if it's just going to be limited to, you know, paying for those costs related to rent and payroll. But I think, like, you know, your point is, you know, how we provide resources for businesses to adapt, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. Sorry, I was muted, but yes, you're spot on.
Okay. Yeah. And, you know, and I apologize that I don't know the criteria or the limitations for the funds. I mean, Lance, do you know, as far as like the stabilization funds and others that have been set aside, can people also apply for assistance, to help their businesses adjust to this new environment? Whether that's skills and training, or I know at some point someone even mentioned physical structures, right? Heat lamps and all that have been costly. Do you know, Lance?
I don't know the answer to the question. It's a really good, had I been thinking, I would have invited Mr. Schutte, and I was just texting to see if Jason was on to see if he might know, because the two of them have been more engaged in the details of what each of these programs entail, more so than I. So.
Hey, Lance, this is Jason.
Oh, good morning. Good afternoon, Jason. Thank you.
It's not spelled out in any of those programs, and I will tell you from the conversations that Chris and I have had with the small businesses and the both within and outside of the tourism and hospitality industry. That is not the idea. I think is a very good one. But in our conversations with small businesses, that has not been one that has been at the top of their mind. It has been more, give us just the grants to get us to the other side of this, to help us, weather, the absolute decrease in the amount of tourism and the impacts that COVID have had on our businesses. But that doesn't mean that, if a business wanted to use some of the funds that are given to them through any of these grants, or the grants that they might be receiving from the state through the AK Cares program at some point in the future, I don't believe that they have those types of restrictions if they wanted to use it in that way.
Thanks for that, Jason. I appreciate that. And we've talked with a handful of folks on both sides who, their business is down, but they want to, they took PPP loans, they want to keep people engaged, and so they'd like to do, trainings and things like that, but also knowing that asking them to use those grant funds, those limited grant funds on something like training, puts them in a difficult position. There's so many costs right now. So even if they'd like to engage, it's a big commitment and that sort of thing. So I appreciate that, and the perspective of the folks you've talked to. Thank you.
So Tasha has her hand up. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question, Tasha? Sorry for a little delay in getting back to you.
Yeah, so I had a couple of questions, and I did them from the notes of looking at the other documents. So I see there's a number of items for ASD, and I thought at some point we had heard that they were getting their own CARES funding. So I was wondering why we're distributing funds if they already are getting some. And then I think it's a food distribution program, Section 25, a pilot program. I'd wondered why we didn't partner with someone who already has one of those programs running versus, a pilot to me implies a startup that we're starting from ground zero. Section 27 talked about transportation for the homeless, and I was wondering what that was. Is that like travel to and from the housing facility? It was really unclear to me. I also wanted to know if we had at all looked at working to build internet capacity, since that's one of the big things that is keeping people, I think, safe, is working from home and doing school from home. And my experience last year was that everyone had internet that was dropping in and out just because of the number of users had gone up significantly. If that's an area that funds were discussed of maybe putting an effort towards building that capacity. I also saw that we could use funds for an audit and wondered if that was discussed, because I didn't see it in any of the line items. And then I also saw that we could put the funding into interest-bearing accounts and wondered if we had planned to do that before we spent it all. And then maybe just a plug for the Department of Health and Human Services, I saw that we did allocate some funds there, but I would like to see more investment there for training and maybe building capacity. I know there's a lot of programs around town where we could get people trained up to, give shots and do the testing. And, COVID is here, but flu season is right around the corner. It seems like that would be a really good investment to build capacity for people who are able to do those tests and help out. Thanks.
All right, that was a good list of things there. Let's see, Tasha, who can answer some of Tasha's questions there? I know that there are probably a few of us who can, or a few who would.
So maybe I could start, Tasha, for the sections that you were referring to. You were referring to the ordinance, correct, or the resolution? Is that what you were referring to?
Right, and it looks like they're similar to what's in the spreadsheet. They just were sectioned out.
Right, let me see if I can pull that up. So these are can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so Tasha, can you remind me of the sections? So maybe before we start, for those who might have had a chance to review all of this, this is the document that was approved by the Assembly on September 11th that really effectuates the list that Desiree was showing you guys earlier. So this gives you a little bit of history about how the money, where the money's coming from and who's in supporting it. And these are the sections that Tasha was referring to. And I can't remember which ones you were talking about specifically. And we can go from there. Which ones were they, Tasha? Sections?
She says 8 and 9.
8 and 9, okay.
Yeah.
So 8 is $1 million for public health and mental supports to the school district. And the question was, why are we doing this? And does the school district already receive some dollars? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I think there was a request from the school district to provide some support to the school district. I'm going to ask Jason if he can jump in first and then go to Andy to talk about the money that the school district's getting. Jason, can you help us on this one?
Yep, sure can. The answer is yes, the school district did receive some money. I believe it was, and Andy probably has the exact dollar amount, but I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $12 million. And, I believe that they went through their process and spent it in certain ways. I think they bought some devices to help kids with being able to do kind of the e-learning from home that is happening now. A couple of these sections 8 and 9, 8 in particular was one where we were certainly very interested in working with their current provider, which I believe was VOA, and they do provide, I think right now, about 4 mental health providers throughout the district. This $1 million would allow them to, I believe, bring on an additional 12 master's level mental health providers to be able to help the kids through some of the issues that they are dealing with, just as adults are. We wanted to make sure that there were professionals that kids could talk to if they were having a hard time dealing with not being in a school with their friends or other issues that their lives have been just as upended as ours with COVID. So we thought this was a good investment to help the school district and help the kids in the school district. The other one, and again, Andy can probably talk to it a little bit more, but I believe that this the initial request from the school district was quite a bit higher, but they were able to find some additional money. And I don't know if they used part of the 12 million that they did, and this was just maybe what they were short. But we wanted to make sure that as folks start going back to work, I think one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about in a number of the work sessions that we did with the Assembly and with other groups was that childcare was one of the, if not the most important thing that we needed to ensure was stable and secure as folks started going back to work. So as you see, not just in Section 9, but in a couple of the other sections, we made a substantial investment in making sure that our child care facilities and child care to families and parents that I believe are under 200% of the federal poverty line received help, so that they knew that it was okay for them to go back to work because they had a secure and safe place to have their children at throughout the day. But I'll invite Andy to correct me if I am wrong in any of the things that I said about the school district.
So Jason's pretty much spot on that. We did receive a little over $12 million from the CARES Act. We're providing 29 FTE for our elementary health teachers to focus on SEL components and then just safe, healthy practices. We're moving to a 1-to-1 device-to-student ratio for grades 3 through 12. That'll provide devices. That also includes internet connectivity, such as hotspots, or we've recently integrated with GCI to provide bandwidth, just the actual cable modems at houses for low-income students, as well as we've spent the money on setting up these blended courses, these online courses. We paid our teachers to come in and develop these courses that previously didn't exist. Did that over the summer, and then some of this money will go to PPE, summer school. There's some funding for equitable outcomes, so like to ensure that our most needy students are getting the appropriate services they need. And then a portion of it, a little over 500,000, will go to charter schools, and then about 360,000 will go to non or private schools per the terms of the CARES Act. As for the preschool, we had budgeted and expected allocations from the state to pay. We usually get preschool grants, but those were shorted by, they ended up being about 440,000 or so. So this 250 will help make up some of that current shortfall. But that's really what the district's plans are. Then the mental health component that the municipality is proposing will be the services on top of what we're providing with our CARES money.
So also I wanted to, Jimmy put in a question in the chat about whether those mental health positions were temporary, or are they a one-time thing? What happens when the money's gone? Is there an ongoing way that those can be supported?
Go ahead, Andy.
Oh, I was going to say, any funding that the district receives is, we get our boards turnover just like the Assembly does. So anything we do is essentially one-time funding. We don't anticipate these, if we would like these to go forward, but it's certainly not a guarantee.
Okay, sure. Jonathan has had his hand up, and so I wanted to give him a chance to ask his question.
So thanks, Chair Clouda. I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this. This is not an easy thing to do, to put all this together. I want to pivot a little bit or build on one of Tasha's comments, which is that, I'm not seeing any money in here for us to be proactive about really suppressing the virus. I mean, the number one way to get back to economic activity is to have a low rate of virus in the community. And the world in that area is changing rapidly. Within the last 2 weeks, FDA has approved basically home-based saliva tests that are going to be available by October. And I just wonder if we should be setting aside some money to be preparing for what is going to be a change in the testing regime from these very, very expensive, very lab-based tests to what are more almost pregnancy style tests or saliva based tests that it can be done in the home for a cost of between $1 and $5 with, high sensitivity and accuracy. And I'm, just thinking, like, if we really want to be proactive, we maybe want to be buying some of those tests and making sure that they're available in doctors' offices, that they're maybe even available in schools, so that we can do that test, rapidly and kind of be on the forefront there of limiting exposure. So, I mean, that's my comment. And I just want us to be thinking about proactively suppressing the virus, not just reacting to economic conditions, because proactively suppressing the virus is improving economic conditions.
Yeah, and Jonathan, this is Jason. That's a great comment. And what I will say to that is that this is only kind of one part of the response. I think a lot of what you raised and a lot of the issues that you discussed about, I think we're actively working through, but we're working them through a different process, and that's through our EOC, because a lot of the things that you mentioned currently are still FEMA reimbursable. So I think that is one of the reasons why you'll see in these documents, we set aside up to $12 million to essentially pay the match, the local 25% match for all of the FEMA expenditures. And the reason we did that is because we still haven't gotten word from the state on if they're going to cover those. Historically, anytime that there have been FEMA expenditures in the state or in Anchorage, or for that matter around the state has picked up the 25% local match. We don't know if that's going to happen. Certainly $12 million set aside, 20, you multiply that out, that gets us to about $50 million. We have only set aside right now $34 million in kind of emergency appropriations that we are attempting to get reimbursed through FEMA. So there's still, that's why we built in a little bit more set aside on the FEMA match, because I think some of the issues that you brought up are the ones that we're still working through. And as we get better data and better information on how those items are available, we'll make decisions on purchasing those types of things and making sure that we have, available funds to pay the match.
Okay. I appreciate the clarification and the ability to get that on the record for the public. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's see. So yeah, and Jonathan, raises an interesting point too. I mean, we're often thinking about this in terms of the economic response, but it is, after all, a public health matter. I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I just sent an email. I whipped up a really quick graph to show the breakdown of the CARES funding that the Muni did, and which is helpful for me to put into perspective what amounts are going to which categories. So I emailed that out to the group. I could actually. Maybe would it be all right if I share my screen and put it up there, and maybe that can help us talk about this a little bit?
Yes.
All right. Here we go. So yeah, so if this is useful at all, we can see where the largest categories in the breakdown are. The first responder payroll reserve is the largest. 21 million in there. Rental and mortgage assistance is next. That contingency fund that we're talking about, where there's just short of $15 million, is the next largest. I mean, so that money is essentially unallocated. It sounds according to Suzanne LaFrance and to others, there's some consideration of what the best use of that money is, and I think that they are interested in entertaining ideas there. So I don't know, maybe it might be worth kind of perusing that and thinking a little bit about, is the money in the right categories here? Are there things that are being missed? What else? What other considerations might there be? So any thoughts or considerations? Actually, so I've got a question, maybe for Jason. So this breakdown shows, the CARES funding going towards the 3 properties, and and I think you could probably give us the full background there, but that ended up being not allowable, probably according to Treasury guidance, but still, but the muni's still able to purchase those properties with other funding and then use CARES funding to offset other expenses. Is that correct?
Only partially. So thanks for asking that particular question. I want to make it very clear that Treasury did not say that we could not use the money to purchase properties. In fact, they said it was something that was allowable. The only issue that they raised and was not in any part of the guidance was that whatever properties you acquire, the individuals that will be helped by that have to be inside the building, accessing the services by December 30th. And certainly for a couple of the properties that we were discussing, that is very much a doable thing. The one that is a little bit would be a little bit harder to do just because of the necessary renovations is the old Alaska Club. So as part of the conversation with the Treasury Department, they said, look, you can do it, but you just have these restrictions. But there is another option that we have provided to you, and one of the bigger takeaways that we had from the meeting was they said, we're not sure why jurisdictions like Anchorage and others across the country are contorting themselves, and that was a direct quote, into trying to fit into one particular piece of the guidance. If communities are willing to spend general government dollars on all of these programs that you have come up with, we have given you that option, and that is to run the money that you are receiving through the payroll of your first responders. Within the guidance, they have given us the legal presumption that that is an allowable expense. And what that ends up doing is freeing up general government dollars that can go towards any of these items. The ultimate result that comes from that is twofold, and Treasury again confirmed this, is that one, Treasury and the IG's office, if you do it this way, are never going to ask you any questions about how you spent it. And was that an eligible activity? Because we've already told you running it through payroll is an eligible activity. So if you were spending general government dollars, we're not ever going to come and ask you any questions. And the second, and probably more important part of this, is that the December 30th deadline no longer applies to any of these programs. And certainly, as we go through some of these, it wasn't just necessarily the property purchase that was going to be difficult to reach the December 30th deadline. So I think what we're doing right now is kind of examining all of the items in here that would likely be difficult to complete by December 30th and figuring out what the next steps are. There will likely be some sort of resolution that we'll have to put forward and get assembly approval on that will essentially run significantly more of this funding through our payroll. And then that, like I said, opens up the the ability for us to use general government funds on. But again, we haven't determined kind of what that dollar amount is or what it is, but I wouldn't expect any changes to this underlying document at this point.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I see that Carla has her hand up.
Hi, everyone. I've been kind of trying to stay a little bit neutral on this because obviously all of this affects me personally in my business. So, but I did want to make a couple of comments. I know that there has been an incredible pushback on the assembly and the mayor using the money for the properties. And I think that it's incredibly important since Anchorage shut down after the initial shutdown, causing a greater negative economic impact, that those types of business impacted by the muni shutdown the second time are first and foremost on the assembly and the mayor's mind. You know, just about everywhere, I guess everywhere else in Alaska stayed open except us. And that first wave of federal funding that came through was to get us through the first shutdown and not particularly the second one. So I just kind of want to throw that out there a little bit. I also wanted to make sure that I think it would be really smart for the mayor and the assembly, and they may have already done this, and I'm popping in and out of this meeting because I've got stuff going on here, but I think it's really important to let the public know exactly why they're using the funds the way they're using them. When I looked at Nolan's chart here, I see assembly department capacity. I don't exactly know what that means. I assume Nolan can probably tell us what that means. But I just think it's important if whatever route they decide to go, they have some type of justification for the public so that there's not, you know, dissension and craziness of, you know, there's some pretty hateful things going around right now amongst the public in Anchorage. So I'm just kind of wondering what that is, just for my curiosity, Nolan, if you know. And once again, I just want to emphasize that I hope that the people who were negatively impacted by the second shutdown are first and foremost on the mayor's mind and on the assembly's mind in dealing with this distribution of this money. Thanks.
Oh, thank you for that, Carla. I actually am not really able to speak in any detail to any one of these items. I think you know, this of course was just the table that they based that said, you know, a one line of what the program is and then dollar amount. So I think that there are other justifications that have been put onto the record, and I'm not really, you know, able to speak to those.
Okay, thank you.
Nolan and Carla, we'll get the answer to the specific question about the assembly matter. I do think that there's a couple of things at play, and Jason can add on. We are thinking about, you know, the future, and not necessarily just the second, the last 4 weeks, but what's going to happen in the future. And we're also keeping an eye on what Treasury might do if they do this again, or if they don't. And that's kind of the uncertainty and the difficult in plotting a for sure course about the 156 that we have, because we know where we are, but what we don't know is what's going to be different for the rest of this year and next year. And we don't know if Treasury or Congress will provide any additional resources to the state or to us in the future. And that's what sort of, I think, the importance of the framework and then the allocation. But I do agree with you that, you know, making sure that we're planning for the impacts of sort of the second effect that we had recently, and then what might happen in the future is definitely on the mayor's mind, and I assume on the assembly's mind.
Thank you, Lance. I think Jimmy's got his hand up.
Thanks, Nolan. Who is included in this first responders payroll reserve? Is that municipal jobs, or does it extend to, you know, healthcare providers? What does that literally look like?
So the Treasury guidance on that allows the payroll expenses for at least within Anchorage, APD, AFD, and our health department employees.
Okay. And are we really, I mean, obviously healthcare employees are going up dramatically, but with people kind of hunkered down, I would largely assume that, you know, APD and AFD would likely have decreases in costs in this kind of environment. Or is that what we're seeing, or are we assuming that 21 million is going to go to healthcare employees, or what does that look like?
So I think let me make clear that this money going there is not an increase to their budget. I think, as I was trying to explain earlier, this would free up the general government dollars that have been allocated to this, that then allows us to spend general government dollars on the programs, as I mentioned, that we've gotten additional guidance from Treasury on in terms of the December 30th date and how stringent they're going to be with that and some of these other programs. So the first responder payroll reserve is not an increase to any of these budgets.
Okay, thank you.
And Jonathan, I see your hand is up. Is that, I don't know if that's from earlier or if you had another question.
Oh, I think that's from earlier, and I seem to have lost my. Just ignore me for now, Nolan. Thank you.
All right. No, just wanted to check, make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so I actually do have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. And I know that we're kind of, I think our work session really seems to be that we're still getting our heads around what this all means and where the money's all gone, and which I think is productive for us. But I don't know that we're anywhere close to recommendations or a resolution. Is this a topic, and we're also, you know, as we with our next, you know, coming meetings, where we're coming into budget season, and we still probably want to consider a draft resolution for alcohol taxes, and so I think we're going to have a lot on our plate, and I'm not sure what the will of the group is when it comes to where we want to direct our efforts between CARES, alcohol tax, the budget overall, and anything else. So I don't know. Are there any thoughts about how you guys want to proceed as a group?
This is Lindsay. I think that it's, I mean, I agree. There is just a lot out there, and it does seem like, looking back at your email, that there's another group that's already providing recommendations, you know, on the CARES funding. So I guess my question is, are our efforts duplicative of what other people are already committed to doing, and are we better focusing our resources on sort of those ongoing efforts?
It's a fair question to ask, I think. You know, Lindsay, you know, that there certainly are groups weighing in. The Economic Resiliency Task Force, and I know I was on the agenda to speak about that. But what my main, if I had to distill its contribution to this, I think it has not provided incredibly detailed and timely recommendations on CARES funding. I think overall, I wouldn't say that it's been super effective at conveying you know, very detailed recommendations forward, is sort of the long and short of it. That's my personal opinion. And the Assembly, of course, has asked for this input, I think, as well from us. But it's absolutely a valid point. I mean, we do have to think about where our efforts are best spent. I think the Assembly, you know, what I heard overall from them was you know, did we do this right? Are there some changes that could be made? You know, you know, the framework's basically agreed upon, but on the other hand, you know, there's a little bit of slack in there too, a little bit of scope to it to make adjustment. And I think, you know, whether we recommend adjustment or not is you know, up to us. I am actually going to have to go right now, so I know we're sort of leaving this hanging. But could I get a motion to adjourn? Unless you guys want to continue without me.
So Nolan, can I offer this? Alyssa, are you still on? Alyssa? So I was going to ask Alyssa to vice chair this thing in your absence. I have a suggestion. Why don't we pick this up on September at our meeting next week? Our agenda for September is pretty light. It's mostly informational about where the calendar is on the budget. I think we can pick up where we left off. You guys can carry on from that point. How about that?
Sounds good.
Okay.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
Lindsay, and who seconded that, please?
Jonathan.
Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Desiree, for the help. Appreciate it. Thank you, Jason.